Thanks so much for joining me today. Today I have the pleasure of joining Christy Ruling. She's celebrating passing 10,000 YouTube subscribers on her channel, and I'm really excited that she asked me to be part of the special celebration hop that she has going on to be able to celebrate the fact that she passed this great milestone. The theme for this special video hop is celebration cards. So I'm going to be creating this fun birthday card featuring some of the newest Simon Says stamp products. I'm going to be showing you how to do some fun Copic coloring to create this really cute clown, as well as a few other tips and tricks along the way. So let's get started. Here I've got two of the new products that I'm going to be using in this card. This is the Critter Costume Party and also the Big Numbers stamp set. Both of these have coordinating dies, and I'm going to be using them to create this fun birthday card. You can see that this Critter stamp set comes with a lot of really cute images. We're going to be using only the clown today, but you could create this card with all the other images if you wanted to. Now I'm going to go ahead and lay out some of the images that I'm going to need for my card onto my Misty stamping tool. This is the Mini Misty, and I chose this one because it's a smaller size and it fits inside the video screen better. The only difference between the Mini Misty and the regular Misty is the size, so it all depends on what kind of size of Misty you're looking for if you're interested in getting one. I'll have them linked in the video description and also my blog. Now I'm stamping my images onto some white cardstock using Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink. I had to stamp it twice because I didn't press down on the little bear clown very well, so I just quickly restamped it, and the help of the Misty really makes that a lot easier. Now I'm going to start Copic coloring these images. I use some pretty simple shading to go ahead and color in these images, but I'll go ahead and walk you through the process. So I started off with a light brown. This was E51, and I'm adding some shading with E53. I really think these two colors work well together to create a nice soft brown color tone. And I'm going to bring in E55 here to go ahead and add some darker shadows. Now, you'll notice here that my Copic coloring bled a little bit because that marker was oversaturated. To compensate that, I went ahead and took the lid off of the other end of the Copic, and that helps equalize the pressure that's in the marker and helps kind of get that marker nib to not be quite so saturated. And because it had that little bit of a splotch there on the end of his paw, I went ahead and used that brown color to do the shading underneath his paws as well. And that hid my mistake pretty easily. I added a little bit of pink to his ears and paws, and now I'm bringing in some BG markers to start coloring in the little ruffle scarf that goes around his neck. I'm adding some shading with BG05 and BG07, and then I'll go ahead and blend that out with my latest color. And for those of you that are interested in the Copic coloring, I have all the marker colors listed on the side of the screen and also at my blog, so you can go ahead and reference them if you're interested in creating the same color combinations. Now, the hair was a bit interesting because I wanted to color his hair multicolored. And to be able to get a good blend between these colors that I'm using here, I'm overlapping them so that way they kind of blend into each other. And that'll help create a little bit of in-between colors so that way they blend into each other a little bit more evenly. I'm using the exact same colors that I've used so far in the rest of the bear because I want everything to match really well. So I'll go ahead and continue adding color and shading along the bottom portion of the hair, closest to where the hair meets his head. I'll let that dry a second and I'll move on to coloring in the little party hat. Just use some oranges, and I use those same oranges along his little vest here in the center of his body, and I just shaded that with the same markers again that I used on the party hat. This is pretty simple shading that I'm doing here, nothing too elaborate, and it's very easy to replicate. Now that that hair has had a bit of time to dry, I'm going to add in some texture by just doing some stippling or dots on the hair just to kind of give it a little bit of a furry, fuzzy look, because of course, as we know, clown hair has that fuzzy, curly feel to it. My bear is pretty much done, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to coloring in the numbers. These numbers I'm actually going to pretend are balloons. I thought these would be really fun to create little numbered birthday balloons, and I'm making this card for my brother. Hard to believe that my youngest brother is turning 18 this year, but he is, and I'm going to go ahead and save this card for his birthday. I know he doesn't watch my channel, so I don't have to worry about him knowing that this is his birthday card. So after I colored in the numbers, I did some ombre coloring of just reds, oranges, and yellows and blues. It's the same colors that I used on the bear. I'll go ahead and add some detailing using a black pen and also a white gel pen to go ahead and just add in a little bit of extra detail to the stamped images. Now that my coloring is all finished, it's time to work on my card panel. For this panel, I wanted to have the birthday across the bottom portion of the card, and I wanted to have the bear sitting on top of the word birthday with the balloons hanging from his hands kind of floating up towards the top of the card. So I prepped the surface of this Bristol Smooth paper, and I'm going to go ahead and start inking up my stamp with some Simon Says Stamp Clear ink. I'll go ahead and stamp this down onto my paper, and then I'm going to go ahead and put on some embossing powder. This is white embossing powder that I'm going to be using here from Ranger. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to double emboss this image because I want it to be a little bit more dimensional and raised up from the paper than as if I had just done one layer of embossing. So I'll go ahead and heat set this until the powder has melted onto my paper. And then I'll move on to re-stamping this. And this is where the Misty comes in really handy because it allows me to place the paper right in the same exact spot that I had it the first time just by lining it up along that right corner. I'll go ahead and prep it once again with my EK Success powder tool, re-ink it with the embossing ink, and I'll go ahead and stamp it right back on top, just being careful not to push too hard. I'm not pushing too hard because I don't want the letters to be unlegible, so I'm going to make sure I press lightly so that way it's only stamping on top of the embossing powder that we already have on there. And I'll just go ahead and reapply the embossing powder and heat set this once again. And the dimension that you get from the double embossing really just adds that extra bit of dimension to the sentiment. And I think it really helps it pop off of the card better. I wouldn't do this with a detailed stamp, but for something like this where it's kind of block lettering, it really worked well. Now I'm bringing in some Wild Honey Distress Ink, and I'm quickly blending the color onto the paper. Now obviously I did not blend this quickly. This clip is quite sped up. But I'm just going to go ahead and quickly blend in some color, just adding darker coloring along the bottom. I masked off that bottom portion underneath the word birthday, and I blended the color up towards the top, making sure it got lighter as it went up towards the top of the panel. I'll remove the masking tape, so there you can see we have that nice crisp line. And I'll go ahead and take a rag and just buff off the letters to get that extra ink off of the embossing. And because that embossing powder has that nice slick surface, it resisted the distress ink beautifully. So we have this nice bright white sentiment. Now I reapplied that mask that I had along the bottom portion because I decided I wanted to add some text in the background. But I wanted it to be subtle. I didn't want it to be really dark. So I'm taking that same Wild Honey Distress Ink and this You Matter background stamp from Simon Says Stamp. This is again a newer product. I just tested it here to make sure that it's going to cover my panel completely, and I'm focusing a little bit darker ink towards the bottom. I'm applying the ink with my Distress tool, and that just helps me get that nice gradation and also make sure that I don't get too heavy, because if I had used an ink pad, the ink would have been a lot more concentrated and quite darker. So this allows me to create that nice subtle tone-on-tone effect, and I'll just go ahead and press that down onto my paper. You can see that great subtle tone-on-tone stamping that we have on the background of this panel. Really looks great. Now I'm going to go ahead and buff off that embossed sentiment once again, and then I decided I wanted to add a bit of splatters, so I'm taking my distress sprayer and I'm spritzing on a bunch of water droplets onto the card. Now you'll notice here I probably shouldn't have taken that mask off yet, but the splatters were an afterthought after I'd taken the mask off, so I'm just going to go ahead and quickly dab up that ink that's bleeding down into our white area of the card panel, and we're going to actually be adding shading along the bottom portion, so I'm not too worried about it. But if you did want to have a nice crisp white bottom area, definitely don't go ahead and take off that mask. Make sure you get the water splatters put onto the background before you remove the mask. So here's that shading I mentioned. I'm taking some warm gray Copic markers and I'm just adding some simple shading underneath the word birthday, focusing the darkest of the coloring right underneath the letters, and then let it soften out as it heads towards the bottom and outer edges of the panel. For the bear, I put some regular ATG adhesive along the bottom portion of his body, and I'm putting a piece of foam tape towards the top of his head, and that's going to allow him to have a little bit of extra dimension. He's not going to be flat fully against the card, only the bottom portion of his body is, and the top portion is going to be raised. So that just adds a little bit of extra interest to the card. Now I'm going to go ahead and start putting some foam tape on the back side of my numbers, but then I'm also putting a piece of embroidery floss on the bottom piece of each foam tape. And that's just going to allow me to have a place to be able to attach my little floss, which is going to be the balloon strings for each of these little number balloons. And I'll go ahead and continue this until I have embroidery floss attached to the back side of each number balloon. Now, I will mention that I used a full strand of embroidery floss. If you want the balloon strings to be a little bit thinner, you might want to take the embroidery floss apart, but I really liked the thicker balloon strings, so I'm going to go ahead and leave them at the 6 strands that come in the embroidery floss itself. So if you want to, again, if you want it to be smaller, go ahead and remove some of the strands from the embroidery floss. But like I said, for this card, I left all 6 put together. So I'll go ahead and make sure I get these lined up onto my panel. As I was putting them onto the card, I hadn't pressed them down all the way until I was sure I liked the placement, and I didn't, so I shifted them a little and then I pushed them down all the way. but making sure that I didn't apply them down fully when I was first attaching them to the card allowed me to be able to move them after I had gotten them all lined up. I tied the strings from the 8 and the TH balloons into a little overhand knot, and then I tied an overhand knot for the number 1's balloon string, and I'll go ahead and put these down onto my bear's paws using some PPA matte adhesive. I'm just going to go ahead and line those up, figuring out where I'm going to be placing the dot of glue, and then I'll lay those balloon strings into his paws. For some final embellishment, I'm taking some iridescent sequins from Pretty Pink Posh. These are a mixture of Ocean Spray, Strawberry Burst, I believe there's a bit of the Sunshine Glow color, and I think there's one more in there, but I'm not positive. But I will have them all linked down in the video description and over at my blog, so all the colors are listed there. So that's going to finish up my card. The only other thing I did was I added a little bit of glossy accents to his nose and his eyes, and then I popped everything up onto a white A2 card base. So I hope you've enjoyed and got some inspiration on using these fun products from Simon Says Stamp. Be sure to remember that this video is part of a very special celebration blog hop for Christy Gets Crafty's YouTube channel. You can head on over to the next stop of the hop. I have it linked below in the video description. So make sure you scroll down to go to the next stop in this fun hop. And then also be sure to head on over to my blog where you can get more information on the card, including still pictures and products used. If you enjoyed this video, here's another one you might enjoy featuring Simon Says Stamp exclusive products. Please give this video a big thumbs up, subscribe to my YouTube channel for more inspiration from me, and you can also find me on social media at Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, YouTube, as well as my blog. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you again soon.